Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks, everyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Keto and Crime. Today, I've got a very special video. I've got a little synopsis of Hillsong Church, as well as its history, its founders, and some of the scandals around it. And then I have a discussion with my good friends over at the Church is Lame YouTube channel and podcast. They are former ministry workers. One worked at a denomination, and they're basically in their head office, and they are still men of faith. They are not atheists like I normally have on, because a lot of my friends are atheists. But no, they are men of faith, and they are working to expose the problems with the whole church system, particularly megachurches like Hillsong, like Bethel, that have kind of made a sham of what the church was intended to do, and they are out to change that for the better. So I have a discussion with them from a believer's and a person that has worked in church hierarchy perspective. So it's going to be great. But for now, I want to say thank you to everyone. A huge shout out to all my patrons, all my channel members, all my subscribers. I love you all. Could not do this without you. Let's dive in, shall we? The beginnings of Hillsong go all the way back to 1922 with the birth of Francis Frank Houston in Australia. He was a prominent Pentecostal pastor that was connected with the Assemblies of God. His original denomination was Baptist, but then he moved over to the Assemblies of God, which is a Pentecostal charismatic denomination that is known worldwide. He established in 1977 a church known as Sydney Christian Life Center, and kind of grew it from there. His son Brian would become his partner in the founding of what would become Hillsong. Brian Houston was born in Auckland, New Zealand on February 17, 1954, to Frank and his wife Hazel, who were at the time officers in the Salvation Army before they moved to Baptist and then to Assemblies of God. So religion was a huge part of the Houston's life. He met his future wife Bobbie, and they were married in 1977. He began serving at his father's church, the Sydney Christian Life Center, as an associate pastor, and worked his way up from there. For a long time, both their churches, both Sydney Christian Life Center and a small church that Brian started elsewhere, were Assemblies of God churches. In fact, both Frank and Brian would serve as the head of the Assemblies of God denomination in Australia. However, Hillsong itself has its beginnings in the early 90s, 1992, when they held their first Hillsong conference between the two churches and drew people in. They also started their music business. I don't know if you're aware of that, but both Hillsong and Bethel are huge publishers of Christian and worship music. So if you're in the ministry, if you use worship music, if you use contemporary Christian music, a lot of those are either going to be Hillsong or Bethel. And by 1997, all of the Houston's churches were now designated as a neo-Pentecostal megachurch, and then eventually were branded as Hillsong. Hillsong also established 2 seminaries and church leadership schools, both in Australia, and by the 21st century had grown to over 132 churches worldwide, with a regular attendance of over 150,000 members and in 30 countries. So they're all over the world. The 2 main ones here in the United States are the ones in California and New York. In California, that's the one famously attended by Chris Pratt and other celebrities. It has become a leader in the megachurch world. However, it hasn't been all smooth sailing. Let's talk about some of the scandals. First scandal is how the church expanded so quickly. There's plenty of documentation that shows that Hillsong, because it was so popular in Australia and then in Europe, it actually would hold itself out as a helper of the small church. And so a lot of small churches would go to Hillsong for help in growing their congregations and actually making a living. Now, when I talk about megachurches, I'm not talking about, the average little Baptist church down on the corner that the pastor has to work another job to make ends meet. I'm not talking about any of those churches. I'm talking about probably less than 5% of all churches fall into this mega church model where they are literally money-making machines. And so you got these little churches that struggle, that look to Hillsong as help, as, divine help to help them grow their congregations. And Hillsong would come in and offer those kind of consulting services, and then in the end, basically do a hostile takeover of the church. And so that is how they grew, through basically corporate arbitrage. It's not exactly a fun, sweet story. So I'm not saying all their churches grew that way. Many of them they did buy or lease the land and buy a building or build a building, but a lot of them they took over existing churches and forced out the church's leadership. In addition to that, you had the controversy surrounding Hillsong's co-founder, Frank Houston. He was accused of abusing young boys from the ages of 7 to 12 from 1965 to 1977 during his ministry as an Assemblies of God pastor, as well as the head of the Assemblies of God in Australia. By 2000, they had several of these allegations coming out, and it was at that time that Sydney Christian Life Center was basically taken over by son Brian Houston and merged with his churches to form Hillsong, because Frank had to step down as a pastor and to remove himself from church registries to keep. It was at that time that Brian Houston met with Assemblies of God Executive Council as well as Hillsong leadership and decided to actually report some of these crimes finally. And according to the church, they agreed to make a payment of $10,000 to each of these victims. But as of this recording, only 2 of the children's families have ever been paid. Fast forward to just this year, January of 2022, when 2 other scandals broke as well. When Brian Houston was asked to step down from Hillsong because he's been criminally charged in Australia for concealing the sexual abuse of children by his father. According to them, he found out late 80s, early 90s, and concealed it. It was only when he was forced to by angry parents that the church decided to do something about it. But he's being criminally charged now in Australia for concealing that evidence, as well as generalized abuse of women in the church. And then to top off this scandal pudding, we have the former head of the Hillsong Church in New York, Carl Lentz. Carl Lentz was born in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He attended North Carolina State University, where he played basketball. He moved to Los Angeles after graduation and attended the King's College and Seminary, and then went on to study at the Hillsong Seminary and Leadership College in Sydney, Australia, where he became good friends with Brian Houston's son, Joel. And according to documents that I've seen, basically these two kids, because they were the owners, pet boys, were able to skirt through the Hillsong College with hardly ever attending a class. Only by running errands for leadership at Hillsong, they were able to get their credential. And after they graduated, they decided to move to New York City and establish a campus of Hillsong Church there. And that's what they did for several years until he met a young man by the name of Justin Bieber. Now, Justin was going through some interesting things in the mid-2010s, such as getting into some drag racing scandals, public disturbance scandals, and his mom reached out to Carl Lentz, who was well known as a pastor at the time, and asked him to befriend Justin, which he did. And from the time he met Justin Bieber to the time that Justin Bieber cut all contact with him, you can see his celebrity grow. He did the talk show circuit. He was on Ellen. He was on Oprah. He was on The View. He became the rock star celebrity pastor, which I think he was more wrapped up in than anything else. And then all of a sudden, Justin Bieber cut off all contact with him. I mean, he very publicly baptized Justin Bieber at the home of Kevin Durant and other well-known celebrities. And then eventually Justin Bieber, I think, got wind that he was being used and cut off all contact with Lentz. And Lentz continued a downward spiral from there, having a very public extramarital affair, and eventually being removed, again, January of this year, from his leadership position at Hillsong of New York. In addition to these very well-known scandals, Hillsong has known for some other controversies, such as controversial beliefs about healing and charismatic power, just like Bethel. And if you're interested in my expose on Bethel, I'll put it right up here. Pretty much the same playbook. These are cut from the same cloth. In addition, you have the treatment of different members of the church. For example, LGBTQ plus members are often lured into the church saying that we're all accepting, and then they're kind of treated, according to people that have attended, as you can be here, but we're trying to change you. You're not really accepted. And this is not just common with Hillsong. A lot of these megachurches that claim to be LGBTQIA friendly, not really. It's just kind of a thing to get into. Whatever your beliefs are on that, I'll leave that to you. But so not only that, there's a rampant abuse of church staff. A lot of people that are on the staffs of these churches are unpaid volunteers, and they are worked 40 plus hours a week in addition to working a normal job. Some of the associate pastors work up to 120 hours a week. They are very symptomatic of what is known as pastoral burnout. And it's almost like a continuous factory, the way that these mega churches pump these staffers in and out. They have huge production teams, IT teams. And that's where I enter my two buddies from 𝐻𝐢𝐯 podcast. They worked in that world, both at a denomination headquarters and in the IT and support world of these mega churches. And they have a great insight on what happens within these churches. And so with that being said, I'm going to jump over to my conversation with 𝐻𝐢𝐯 podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Today I have some guests. I have Scott and Mark from 𝐻𝐢𝐯 podcast. They are here to talk about mega churches and church scandal from an insider's perspective. They've both been in that world, and I think they'll have a great perspective for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark first and just have you guys give us a quick biography, and I'll have all the links for their stuff down below. You should go check out their YouTube channel, their podcast, their website, and just kind of, how did you go from being in the church world to 𝐻𝐢𝐯?
Oh, well,
we don't know. We don't know.
I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that, the church has a lot of lame stuff. And of course, being in the church, I've had my shared experiences of things that were just super not cool. And a lot of these people are doing this stuff in the name of God, right? And so it's like when you're trying to be a faithful Christian and you see this stuff, it's just gonna make you pretty mad. And so like, when Scott proposed the Church is Lame podcast idea, I was like, yeah, I'll do that with you. That sounds fun.
Now, both of you have been in the ministry before, or have worked in that world, right?
So that's how Mark and I met, as a matter of fact, is we were both worked at the same office at the denominational headquarters. But I've spent much of my professional career as an IT person, being in IT for megachurches. And so yeah, the thing is, one of the things that happens is these churches are always asking themselves, what are we doing wrong? Why are people leaving? But the answer they always come up with, oh, we're not doing anything wrong. People are just leaving of their own accord. And so one of the reasons the podcast exists is to kind of answer honestly, like, what are the stupid things churches do that cause people to not want to be interested in it?
And I know you guys have a lot of theories on that. I mean, they have great stuff. If you enjoy my cult videos, my televangelist videos, go over there and check out their stuff, because I'm an atheist talking from the outside. They're insiders talking from the inside. So it's a great perspective. And so I kind of wanted to have you guys on as kind of a companion to my video on Hillsong. I know you've covered this as well. What's up with Hillsong? Why are they unraveling like they are?
What's not up with Hillsong? Oh my gosh. Well, let's start here. Hillsong is a megachurch in Australia. And in our world, we call them prosperity gospel, which is they talk a lot about success and money and how God wants you to be successful and have everything you've ever wanted. The big house, the 2-car garage, the 2.5 children, the puppy dog, the white picket fence. And they cherry pick the verses out of the Bible that make people feel like, yes, this is my dream and God wants me to have all I want. And what it does is it creates a situation where people look at these pastors and these leaders and they just go, my God, this is a man sent from God's own heart. And he couldn't possibly do any wrong. And they couldn't possibly have anything but the highest morals and the highest ethics and the highest ways of doing what they do, right? And of course, what we learn as organizations get bigger and deal with bigger budgets and have more to lose, they tend to worry less about being spiritual and tend to worry more about things like growth and PR. And so Hillsong right now is in the middle of an incredible, disillusion, maybe. Lots of pastors becoming clear that they are having adulterous relationships, that they're dealing with money poorly, that there's all sorts of sexual abuse, professional abuse happening, to the point where the leader of the global church had to step down, and as well as the leader of the Hillsong branch in New York having to step down in shame as well over all these same things. Apparently the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Well, the most amazing thing to me when researching this was, well, first of all, the improprieties started like right away. In fact, when one of the founders, and I always want to call him Fred, but it's not, it's Frank Houston. I don't know why I want to call him Fred. One of the founders, when he was head of the Assemblies of God in Australia, he was touching little kids. And it was well known and got covered up at that level. And then that just continued when he and his son started Hillsong. I mean, where's the morals there? Well, I mean, okay, the common person that's going to the church, they don't like it, but what's up with the morality about the church leaders that they cover this stuff up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I wish I had a better answer than I do. But the answer I have is that, Christians suck.
That'll preach. That'll preach.
It's a club that in order to belong to it, you have to admit that, God has no reason to like you. So
Yeah.
there's that. But then I think a lot of times, churches, we can be victims of our own grace, is that we have this message of grace that, of course, we also suck at doing that. But, it's like when we have somebody who is in a leadership position, we kind of defer to them more than we probably ought to. And then we want to extend them, grace to say, hey, I'm not just going to throw you under the bus. I'm going to try to give you a chance to, explain yourself. I'm not going to punish you as severely. But, there's certain things, like touching kids. I personally don't think that, we need to be showing all that grace. We need to be doing everything to protect those children. And I think what ends up happening is just that you get this weird conflict between people wanting to give grace, but then people wanting to do the right thing and not really making good decisions.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we have to universally draw the line at something like that. Okay, I could care less if a pastor wants to have an extramarital affair. That's their business. I don't care as long as it's consenting adults. But if you're hurting children, hurting the elderly, hurting animals, hurting somebody, that's mentally disabled, that's where I draw the line. That's, from any society standard, is not morally acceptable.
Absolutely. I think probably one of the unwritten rules that all humans agree upon together is that we want our kids to have a better life than we have. And that extends to the church. But another rule that applies to all of humanity is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. So you get these pastors of megachurches who are absolute powers, right? They are the head church, and politicians and policemen stay away from them because it's bad politics. So we don't want to mess with any church and how they do things. So unless there's absolute hard proof that there's some sort of illegal something going on, the powers that be are not going to get involved for the cause of justice. And then, like Mark was saying, you have these thousands of people in a congregation who are wired to defer to that man or woman of God. And it's a recipe for things like abusing children, and I mean abusing women, abusing also. The amount of abuse is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and I think I've listened to enough interviews and stuff like that. Since you guys have come from that culture, there seems to be a culture of, and I saw this when I did the Jim Jones thing, just the way that he worked those people. And I don't like to use the term slave. But I feel that culture is still there in a lot of these mega churches. You have a whole lot of unpaid volunteers working 40 plus hours a week for no money. And pastors, I've listened to so many pastors who are just absolutely burnt out because they're working 80, 120 hours a week. God forbid they ask for a day off. Just that kind of culture. And it's just accepted and no one says anything about it.
Yeah, there's this, and it's a real problem, in every church, is that there's this culture of, I don't want to say, like hitting the grind real hard, but you're just kind of using up your people. That's why, at least in the denomination that, I'm part of, every so many years, pastors get a sabbatical that they're able to take. And that's a paid sabbatical, so they can recharge, they can rest, they can, do what they need to do. To be healthy. I mean, it probably doesn't come enough, but then you have individual volunteers a lot of times. I've worked with a youth ministry, and that can really tear you up. Especially when you're not very young anymore. It can start to catch up to you quickly.
But I'm so pleased to hear that they give their ministers a sabbatical. But
you kind of mentioned before. It's like you talked about cults as part of your thing. That you're interested in talking about, and that's really applicable, I think, to mega churches, because I think at the center of any cult group, like 𝐋𝐞𝐭'𝐬 or whatever, Jim, Alpha, what were they called? Jim Jones's church. I forget what it's
People's
called.
Temple,
People's
which was a
Temple.
megachurch. It started out as like a
Mhm.
little chain of megachurches in the Midwest and the West before he had everybody drink Kool-Aid in South America.
Right.
Yeah. But it's just the centrality of an individual as part of the identity of that body.
Mhm.
And that really is a big problem. I think that's where, you know, the overlap here really hits really hard.
Mhm. And it just appears that a lot of these mega pastors, the Brian Houstons of the world, the Carl Lentzes of the world, Joel Osteen, you know, I could name 100 of them. They're almost elevated to deity themselves.
Mhm.
It almost appears that, like you said, they can do no wrong. Peter Popoff, he's been exposed as a fraud on at least 10 different occasions, but people still give him money. I don't understand that mindset. I even when I was in church, I didn't understand that mindset.
Yeah, there's an aspect of, especially in America. In America, we have a unique situation because the spirituality gets wrapped up with the American philosophies of capitalism, right? And so we see people like Joel Osteen and Mark Driscoll and Brian Houston and all these guys. We see them become richer than any servant of God should ever become. And there's a part of us that hopefully one day maybe we'll get a little bit of that wealth. Maybe we'll get a little bit of that success. Maybe we'll get a little bit of that respect from our peers or whatever it is our hearts desire. And so we don't want to hold them accountable because secretly there's a part of us that wants a piece of that action. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And so we let them get away with, like for Joel Osteen's church, there was, what was it, a hurricane a couple years ago?
Yeah.
And instead of opening their doors just for a week to anybody who needed shelter, they chained up their doors and locked people out. Any person of faith would know that that is totally counter to anything Jesus would have taught us in his lifetime. But for some reason, that community of believers that calls themselves Lakewood Church,
Right.
they're totally cool with it.
Yeah.
You know? And this
there's
represents
justification there. And they accepted his justification, which was really no justification at all. You
Right.
know?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, it's just, I don't know. And I agree with you on the whole capitalist mindset that these churches are businesses. Let's not, okay. And I know there's always, and I've seen some of the comments on your videos where people come at you about tax-free income. Now, I want to preface, and you correct me if I'm wrong, pastors, if they work another job or if they do other things related to their ministry, like write books, yes, that income is taxed. Their salary from the church is taxed. But the money coming into the church is not taxed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to let Mark speak to this. Yeah.
So pastors are able to claim what's called a housing allowance. And this is only for their pastoral duties. So if they have, you know, if they're a part-time pastor and then they're part-time barista at Starbucks, you know, whatever happens at Starbucks is just completely normal tax income. And when a pastor's at a church, they're considered to be self-employed as well. So they pay 𝐲𝐶 instead of FICA, you know, so it's, you know, 15.6% or whatever it is, or 15.3%. Man, I haven't done payroll in too long. I'm forgetting these percentages.
I think it's 15.3 as far as FICA. On self-employment tax, I understand that because I am self-employed, so it's probably the same.
But you know, when it comes to their federal income tax, they'll still have to pay state income tax on pastoral wages, but for federal income tax, they can claim housing, so they're not taxed on that portion. And it's not like they can just say, well, you know, I need, you know, 100% of my income is housing, and then only use like half of that for their housing costs. If they only use, you know, 50% of that for housing, then they have to just pay the balance of taxes on the rest.
Right, but that's not what happens, right? Because they're self-employed. Well, hey, everywhere I drive is a ministry, so now now I can claim my gas. Hey, I need new suits to do funerals and weddings, and so now that becomes something I can claim. Hey, I need a new TV so that, you know, I can you know, keep up to date with what's happening with streaming churches, you know, and so because you're self-employed and because, once again, the police and government aren't going to come anywhere near you unless you do something blatantly illegal, that corruption aspect plays into it. And all of a sudden, like, all the money that you make and spend is non-taxable for all practical purposes in America as a pastor.
Oh yeah, and then you get into the people that funnel their book sales in through the church, and that's not taxed. So it's a tax loophole that they get away with all this at.
Absolutely.
Many ways to cheese that system.
Yeah, and so it's funny. It's funny to get those comments on our YouTube channel about like how we're so wrong. It's like you guys don't realize Mark works in the finance department of a international denomination. He is under no illusions about how pastors do taxes.
I've seen the pay stubs, buddy.
Oh my God, unbelievable. Yeah, sometimes it's not good to know how the sausage is made.
Yeah, it's like if you ever want to prove your mettle, just work in the finance department of a church denomination, and you'll figure out whether or not it's the right environment for you real quick.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of these scandals happen at the quote unquote non-denominational churches like Hillsong, like Bethel, like Lakewood, probably because they're not attached to an international denomination that might have a little more control. I also know growing up Baptist and Pentecostal, I was a very messed up child. Our Baptist churches, like each individual church hires their own pastor, calls their own pastor, whereas other denominations, they send them somebody out of seminary. So I think it's just difference in how things are made up is how a lot of this gets swept under the rug.
Yeah, I don't know, because like I think the scandal that has never gone away as long as I've been alive is the Catholic Church abusing children and boys, right? They sweep it under the rug in different ways for different reasons. Yeah. Right. But corruption and abuse are unfortunately evergreen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And Tracy, I think you bring up a really good point. When you have an organization that does the ordinations and can engage in pastoral discipline, it's a lot easier for the head pastor of a church to be taken to task, because there's a lot more oversight. And in these, you call them non-denominational churches, but I think it's more fair to say that, Hillsong is its own denomination.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, again, because it centers around what one individual is doing, then they don't have that oversight built in like a denomination would.
Yeah. Well, to that same point, the way that Hillsong grew so fast is basically offering assistance to smaller churches, to help them grow, and then doing a hostile takeover, just like corporate arbitrage. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, there's actually that one case of the one church where the pastor and his wife were trying to leave Hillsong, and because of that situation that you're talking about, like, hey, we're the ones who financially backed you. We're the ones who helped you become where you are. So if you want to leave Hillsong, that's fine, but you leave us the church. Yeah. It's like, wow.
Just taking it over. And then, of course, I know they have their seminary that's in Australia, and that's where Carl Lentz, the head of the former New York head of the Hillsong Church in New York, went with, I believe, Brian Houston's son, Joel. And according to reports that I've read, he basically attended very few classes there. He got graduated because he was running errands for other hierarchy in the Hillsong system.
Yeah. I would not be surprised.
Let me just say this. When you hear the words Hillsong Seminary, what you should actually hear is McDonald's University.
Yeah. Clown college.
It is. It's basically rubber stamping diplomas for anybody who's willing to pay. The amount of students that go to Hillsong Seminary who are international students who really just want to be part of that brand and movement and are willing to pay money in order to have that piece of paper that has their name and Hillsong on the same piece of paper. I've actually worked at a church that went through there, and I can tell you that the person who came out with the degree is terrible at the thing his degree is in. So if that's
it upsets me to hear, because I got my master's at Wheaton College. And, for anybody who's not aware, Wheaton College is a very, very well-known Christian college. It's basically the Christian equivalent to going to Harvard. And it was a very big challenge. I mean, it was a very, very academically rigorous school. I had to learn Greek and Hebrew for it. I mean, really solid stuff. So when I hear about anybody going to one of these, you know, fly by night cheese factory, McDonald's kind of, you know, chain restaurant nonsense of 7 years, it's like you don't do any real work, you don't really get a good education, and then we wonder why, you know, you're running around there, you know, abusing your spouse and, you know, stealing from your church.
Yeah, but there's this whole pool of bodies where you can steal from and force them to show up in your concert video to make even more money on DVD sales.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we have that in common. I went to a Christian college as well. I went to Judson College, which is a old school. Well, COVID got it. It's no longer there, unfortunately.
Right.
But it was one of the first all women's college in the Baptist theological system, and it was sister school of Samford. Also, very academically rigorous college. And I get angry at anybody that says I've got a monkey diploma because I went there. Because it's not.
I mean, I probably still have a monkey diploma, but you know.
Oh, I have a monkey diploma. My my postmasters is from for-profit school. It's definitely a monkey diploma.
Yeah. I have an associate's from DeVry and my bachelor from University of Phoenix. So, you know, there you go.
But yeah, and then of course we know what happened with Carl Lentz. He got tied up with his name, Justin Bieber.
Yep.
And became Justin Bieber's almost like his agent in a way, because you had to go through him to get to Justin for a long, long time. And then Justin kind of broke away from him. I think that was kind of weird. They just, over the course of about 2 years, he suddenly cut all ties. Do y'all have any thoughts or insight on that?
Oh, I have thoughts, many. Insight, probably very little.
Give it.
Come with it, man.
Well, you know, it's like when somebody cuts the relationship off like that, like really all of a sudden, you know, it makes me feel like, you know, that Justin Bieber probably finally caught on that he was being used.
Yeah.
And then just kind of panicked and did what he had to do. Yeah, and because Carl Lentz is a dumpster fire of a human. And, you know, I have no shame saying that. I mean, you're reading the articles about this guy. It just, holy cow.
Yeah. There was no sense of responsibility with him. He was just kind of probably because he was given everything so easily and thought he could do no wrong. I mean, he was carrying on a 2-year affair with somebody right out in the open. I mean, it's almost like he wanted to get caught.
Right. Yeah. Both Mark and I are a bit of music geeks, and every interview I've seen. So Justin Bieber, he tends to collaborate a lot, even though those collaborations aren't always credited on his CDs, on his works, right? But he collaborates a lot, and every interview with anybody I've seen who collaborates with him, I mean, I'm sure that they're kind of bound through the PR world to talk about how amazing he is musically.
Right.
But there are so many people who talk about how well-adjusted he is. And, you know, if you separate him from the celebrity machine, that he actually has a pretty good head on his shoulders.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think probably it doesn't take genius-level deduction to figure out that this guy that you've kind of set up as your role model, maybe you shouldn't have set up as your role model. And probably the best thing you can do is just kind of quietly back away. And you know, not necessarily ring the alarm, but also not get caught up in the dumpster fire, as Mark puts it.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of Justin Bieber's mother that originally reached out to Carl Lentz when Justin was going through his whole, you know, drag racing in a neighborhood and setting mattresses on fire in his yard, just in a really bad state, asking Carl to mentor him. And so perhaps in his own way, Carl did help him through a season of his life. But I think ultimately it was more about Carl getting celebrity and doing the talk show circuit and getting on Oprah and getting on Ellen. That was more the focus of that rather than helping Justin. And I think
for sure
took him a while to catch on.
Right. Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind that Carl was after that celebrity lifestyle, which is kind of interesting because, like, celebrity pastor, like, it doesn't matter what celebrity pastor you are never going to level up to Tom Cruise.
No.
You know what I mean? No. So it's kind of funny to me that people, like, I understand pursuing money. I understand pursuing all these things, but like to pursue that thing in particular has always kind of escape me a little bit, because there will always be a bigger fish, no matter how high you get in the church world, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you will never eclipse the Pope, ever.
No.
The Pope is the most influential Christian on the face of the earth for all time, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of them are maybe more in the pursuit of, I know definitely Carl Lentz was more in the pursuit of the celebrity part of it. And probably if he had gotten to the level I think he was aspiring to, he probably would have left the church eventually. You know, I think it was more about him than the church or any sort of ministry. But then you also have the way that these churches like Bethel, like Hillsong, attract real celebrities, you know, like Chris Pratt, Sabrina Gomez, all of these people, and they kind of get caught up in the hype too. And like, I generally like Chris Pratt. I think he is genuinely a man of faith that tries to do the right thing. I just think he's associated himself with the wrong church, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing when we talk about celebrities who make their faith known, right? It hasn't, like, Chris Pratt has gotten some blowback, but it hasn't really affected him negatively in the same way that it's affected, say, Tom Cruise and Scientology. Yeah. So that's a very interesting thing. And I don't know if they're just kind of reading the wind and kind of saying, well, hey, you know, the Trump years have kind of caused a resurgence in this kind of conservative Christian populist kind of thinking in America. So it's quote unquote safe to come out. Maybe like as if it's brave in America to come out and say I'm a Christian. Yeah, like
yeah, right.
Good for you. Golf claps. Yeah.
Come out as gay or Muslim or
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's a lot of blowback I get. I'm always like, I get people in my comments, why don't you ever go after Islam? Or I said, I have gone after Islam, but I don't know a whole lot about their, you know, there's not a mega temple, anywhere like, that's doing the same things that Christian churches are doing.
Right. But why would you? Like, every time there's a mass shooting in America, it's not an Islamist. It's a white man. Yeah. It's a white man who's doing it in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. And, but yeah, I really think that, I don't know, maybe in a way, celebrities that are out about it use it as a way to connect with their fans, or use it as a way to make them ingratiate themselves more into what they think is American pop culture and American society.
Well, that's
for sure. Because, you know, there's like this, especially in, you know, the more politically conservative versions of Christianity, you know, there's this kind of culture war belief. Like it's just, you know, I think it's absurd, honestly. You know, it's like there's no culture war. You know, there's just a culture, and it is what it is. It is changing, and people are changing away from what you want because you suck, and that's all there is to it. But I think for, like, you know, Chris Pratt especially, like, he knows that he has people that look up to him. You know, you're gonna have these younger church kids who, you know, are seeing, oh, he's an actor and he's in Hollywood. He was in Avengers and all this great stuff. And I think he just wants to be able to be, you know, honest with himself and who he is, but then just kind of use that to encourage these people to stick with the faith, you know. And, you know, most of us Christians at some point, you know, we can attest to having run into a tribulation with our faith, and having, you know, oftentimes a pastor be the reason that we, you know, lose our faith or leave the church. And then sometimes, you know, we come back for more of it because we're goofy.
Exactly.
Can I just say this?
Yeah, please.
Before we move on, I think there's an interesting dynamic with celebrities in particular, because their full-time thing is to be the celebrity, right? Making a movie is not something you do 40 hours a week, right? These movie schedules are insane. You put in 16, 17, 24-hour days sometime, right? So their main focus in life is whatever movie or album or art thing they're doing, and then they move on to promoting it. So I think for most celebrities, to call them people of faith is a little bit weird, because really their life of faith is really a sliver of their life, right? And so they find this part of their life where it's like, okay, everybody's telling me I'm the most awesome thing that ever walked the face of the earth. I can snap my fingers and have cocaine. I can snap my fingers and have as much alcohol as I want. I've got awesome cars and I have big houses in 3 cities. And so in this little sliver of their life, they kind of go, is there anything more? Right? And then, hey, here comes Hillsong to tell me that, yes, there's something more. There's meaning and there's purpose, and God's got a plan for you. Right? And so for these people, that's massively important to them because it fills a really important void, or whatever, however you want to say it, right? There's a piece of their life that gets nourished in this process. But now think about these celebrity pastors. They live 24/7 in God's got a plan for you. God wants you to be awesome. God wants you to be successful. This is all they talk about all day long. They are over it. They just know that they've got to get in front of that microphone, in front of the camera. They've got to peddle the same message over and over again to get people to donate on their phone or to click one more ad on the YouTube video, right? This is their life now. Their life is just saying whatever it is they have to say to get that money flowing in. So it's an interesting thing. Like, you have celebrities that go to faith to fill that little thing, and then you've got people of faith running towards celebrity to fill it. Like, it's that interesting, like, crossover, you know?
Interesting you should say that about say anything. Now, yeah. I've interviewed a lot of former pastors that are now atheists or agnostics, and they often say that when they were still in the pulpit because of financial necessity or whatever it might be, that often their sermons go from more, actual deep spiritual teachings from the Bible to more of a prosperity gospel, more of a mundane platitude type of thing, love is the greatest gift, right before they exit the pulpit. And I see that in all of these mega pastors. So to me, it makes me wonder if any of them are actual believers. I see like atheist shyster stamped on like 80% of them,
Well, yeah. Because in the Bible, you have the Apostle Paul, he's even writing about, that issue with, saying that, we have these guys that they're shysters and they're just snakes and they're out there, but they're still at least preaching the gospel. So, I don't want to be that nice. I kind of want to be like, look, if you're an atheist or, if you don't really believe what you're preaching, get out of the pulpit. But hey, if they're at least preaching the message that's actually there, then it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I think there's an element of what does it mean to be the shepherd, right? To be the pastor, to be the leaders of others. And it used to be that you would not tell people what is right is wrong. Abortion is wrong. Republicans are right. Taxation is wrong. Capitalism is right. Like, that's kind of what the modern American pulpit has turned into. What you should believe. What you should believe. And but it used to be that being a Christ follower was more about finding a philosophy that means that you can be at peace with yourself, be at peace with people around you, and be at peace with, let's say, the divine. Be at peace with whatever you see as the divine. And I think pastors are the first to lose that in the repetition of ministry, right? This weekly grind, like Sunday sermon, Monday take a day off, Tuesday rinse and repeat, right? And then you add to that things like most pastors aren't megachurch pastors. Most pastors are barely making the budget. And so if you're a pastor and your church is barely making the budget, probably the first thing you're going to do is say, well, I'm going to take a cut in my own pay so that we can keep the lights on, right? And then you just add stress on top of stress, on top of a guy or a gal who's already kind of losing their way. And it just becomes a relentless cycle.
My whole thing about taxing the churches, and 95% of the churches are not we're talking about probably less than 5% of churches would fall into the mega church category. I think there's a nice little meet in the middle approach to that, a compromise to that. The churches that are obviously money-making machines, tax them, but leave the little Baptist church on the corner alone. I don't know how we would do that. I'm sure, not fair. They're going to be like, well, Tracy's a hypocrite, but I've been called a hypocrite so many times. But I believe if they are legitimately getting wealthy off of the gospel, that's a business. That's no longer a ministry.
Yeah, back in the old days, like a church, almost all the church income would be to make sure that the pastor, he had a roof over his head and had some food and maybe had some transportation to go make a hospital visit. Great. Don't tax that church, right? But yeah, I think you're right. I think at a certain point, so much money is flowing in and out, and it's not for anything of any charitable reason, right?
No, it's for bigger productions and rock. I mean, Hillsong, I would say probably over half their income is from the songs that they sell to other churches,
right?
And their entertainment value. I mean,
right.
I have a couple mega churches around me. Same thing. They have TV stations. I mean, come on.
And then you add to that the fact that most churches in America, because most Christians in America do identify with being conservative or Republican, most churches in America are totally unafraid to talk politics from the pulpit. And that's when I think, look, you made an agreement with the government. You wouldn't talk politics, therefore we wouldn't tax you. The minute they break that covenant is the minute you tax them for all they're worth.
Oh, and I would be in favor of putting a jar up there every time you talk about politics. $100 in the jar.
Yeah.
Just right there instead of the swear jar.
Of course, it should be more than $100, I think. Because I don't know if you've heard about it. Like, there's this thing, I think they call it Freedom Sunday, which is just this one Sunday a year where this certain cohort of people encourage pastors to be flagrantly political from the pulpit. And I'm sorry, I'm with you. It's like, if you want to do that, tax these people. I don't think anybody who gets wealthy out of ministry is really probably a Christian in the first place. That's, maybe I'm being too uptight about that. But let's face it, you're in a position where you're supposed to be serving everybody in the congregation. If you are too busy serving them, you shouldn't be enriching yourself in any way. And if you are becoming enriched, as somebody who's supposed to be serving everybody else, your money should be going to something different than, your bank account or getting that new pool or getting a Bentley or whatever.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about our favorite witch hunter, Greg Locke.
Oh God, yes, he's about 30 minutes from me.
Right, he's got a video going viral right now that him screaming from the pulpit that anybody who calls him Christian cannot vote Democrat. Right. And so somebody's finally taking him to court over that and wants the IRS to investigate him. So, yeah, I'm all for it.
The last time I covered him was on the witches thing, him wanting to name names of witches and stuff like that. I'm like, I wish he would show up on my doorstep. I really wish he would.
What an awful way to deal with a handful of people in your church that you just want gone, is you're going to kind of like publicly try to embarrass them in front of your entire body of followers. How awful.
And the whole, like, if you wear a mask in here, what about freedom of choice? I'm a big believer. If you want to take the vaccine, take it. If you don't. If you want to wear a mask, wear it. If you don't.
Yeah.
But to tell people they can't come in if they're wearing a mask, come on. You've got some immunocompromised people with comorbidities in that church. You're a monster. Yeah.
Oh, I was watching some kind of documentary, and I wish I could remember what this pastor's name was. But I mean, he was a complete whack job, and he was saying, if anybody comes to his church wearing a mask, they're going to be asked to leave. And he was saying, like, if you get the vaccine, then you're getting whatever devil juice or something. I forget what he called it. It was just, I mean, it's madness. It's like you want to preach freedom, which is you're preaching Americanism, not Christianity at that rate. But you want to preach freedom, but then you're going to take freedom when people want to exercise it in a way you don't like. It's like, well, yeah, that sounds like a Christian to me.
Yeah. It's, would Jesus tell, would Jesus tell a group of people with, like I said, comorbidities not to wear a mask? I don't think so.
No.
It's just like, the whole debate about, I mean, me being on the, a member of what I call the premium pack, the �LGBT_QIA+++. I'm old school lesbian, so I remember when it was just LGBT. So I get totally confused now. But
I tried to explain to somebody what intersex meant, and they just stared at me. I'm like, oh, I'm not good at this.
Pansexual is the one that got me. The first time I heard that, I'm like, lock? Do I need to lock my cupboards? I'm just like. And they're like, no, it's everybody. I said, but isn't that bisexual? No, because that's only male and female. There are genders in between. And I'm just like, okay, whatever.
Hey.
Do you. But that umbrella just keeps getting bigger. Anyway.
Right. It's just so funny because the church is, by and large, only gets brought into the future kicking and screaming against its will on anything. Women in leadership, minorities in leadership. And so from my point of view, gay people in leadership in the church is just simply the latest thing they refuse to kind of admit that whether they like it or not, it's coming. Yeah. And so they can either like open their arms lovingly now or be known as the church that would only be loving and accepting when they had no choice.
Exactly. My whole thing about that, it used to be, all gay people are going to hell. Don't even come in my church. Now you can come to our church, but we want to fix you. Now they've kind of gotten past that. Now it's, no gay people in leadership. And I understand the conflict between what is in the Old Testament versus the New Testament. I get that. But when I was a Christian, I always led toward what Jesus himself said, at least what we are told that Jesus said. Hello. He never mentioned sexuality. Ever. So just stand on that laurel and be kind to everybody, give everybody equal opportunity. And on Judgment Day, if that's the actual thing, let God sort it out. And you can say to God, I followed your commandments. I was open and loving to everybody. And if God is not open to that, well, maybe he's a God you don't need to worship.
Hello. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. That'll preach.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll get off but that's another big scandal with that I've read about, especially like Hillsong and Bethel, how they preach, they accept everybody. But then when you get in there, I've heard interviews with other LGBT people that were in those churches, and they say there is that underlying, we need to fix you. Mm-hmm. And they're not really accepting after you get in there.
Yeah, that's a problem. I have friends that have run into that issue, and it's such a, I don't have a good word for it,
sin. I think Christians would call that sin.
I was going to say it's such an abortion, I guess, because it's like if you're gay,
because that's not controversial right now.
No, not at all.
No,
that's a settled issue.
No.
Gosh.
But it's like when I got to hear, one of my brothers in Christ talking about, going to church and, wanting to be able to participate, maybe play on the worship team or, teach Sunday school or something like that. Because the church is saying, oh yeah, we accept you, we want you here, but we're not going to actually let you contribute to the community that you love and want to be part of. Like, that's just garbage. I mean, you can't say that, oh, you're accepting, and then say that, because you're not accepting. You want to feel good about yourself, and so you're telling yourself a lie.
Yeah, let me give you another moment of how the sausage is made here. There is a misconception that that churches are supported by the entire congregation putting a $20 bill or $50 bill in the pot as it goes around by these small donations. But really, in most churches, even small churches, so in a small church, there's like a single benefactor, and that single benefactor can write $100,000 check at any moment, right? And if you're a megachurch, there's probably more, right? If you're a megachurch of Hillsong's reach, there's probably dozens of big check writing benefactors. Are you really going to change your message in any way, shape, or form that's going to piss off one of those benefactors and cause them to stop writing checks?
No.
Yeah, like the bigger the church gets, the more it becomes a game of follow the money, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. maybe that's the one thing that the Catholic Church got right, is that their clergy take a vow of poverty and they're fully supported by the church. Maybe that's one thing they got right.
Yeah, until you get to be like a cardinal or whatever, and then
and then it's all out the window, and you're allowed
to. Have you seen those outfits the Pope wears? He's looking pretty fly most of the time.
Yeah, he is.
And that little Pope mobile, little Pope mobile, beep beep, just the wave around.
Like, I want to see a Pope that's just like in like, you know, wearing Birkenstocks and cargo shorts, and then just like a wife beater, you know.
Yeah. That's the reason before they, you know, they chose them. There was a cardinal from New York that was like old school Brooklyn that they were considering, and I really wanted him to get it because I just wanted to hear a Pope say, "Forget about it."
That would be amazing.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, you talking to me? That would be fantastic.
That would be. There was also one in Kentucky, and that would have also been good. I want to hear a Pope say "y'all." You know, it's like so.
That would be awesome. Like doing a mass in Latin and then like doing y'all. That would be great.
Y'all.
Perfect. I know Latin with a Kentucky accent. That's going to have to be kind of rough to listen to.
Yeah. Hopefully he speak. You know, when I took Spanish, that was my instructor's main complaint about me is that it sounded like I was from the south of Mexico. You know, it's just like it was bad.
Oh yeah, my godfather, he was a missionary in Costa Rica, and he would see people come down from, you know, the deep south, and they'd have such a strong accent that, you know, they would say something in Spanish to somebody, and then that person would turn to my godfather like, what? Can you say that? You know, yo hablo español, you know. You know?
It's like I used to be in the restaurant industry, and the majority of my kitchen crew I had several people from Mexico. I had a couple of Guatemalans, and one of our servers was from Brazil, and they could sort of talk to each other. But the funniest thing I ever heard is when one of my little people from Guatemala was trying to tell me something, and I couldn't really understand what he said, and I turned to both the Brazilian server and one of my Mexican cooks and said, "Can y'all help me here?" And they looked at me and said, "We don't have a clue what that was."
Perfect.
But so are you both still, I know you work for a denomination, so I assume you go to one of that denomination's churches, I assume. Probably, maybe.
Well, I don't work for that denomination anymore.
Oh, okay.
I ended up, well, it's like I left to finish up school. And then I work in a small church nearby, doing the same thing I was doing, just at a local church level. It's a wonderful little church too.
Awesome. Well, that was my question. Are both of you still active in churches, and do you still believe that church is a good thing?
Yeah, they would like me not to be active in my church. Yeah. Kathy and I and our kids, we go to a you know, I personally believe that all churches are local, right? You find a church near you and you try to do some good in the community around you, right? So we go to a church very nearby. I think they're a little too hip. Maybe I'm starting to turn into the old guy who's like, why can't we just play my favorite music all the time, right? So yeah, they're a little woke, and they're kind of like wearing a lot of plaid and a lot of flannel and a lot of corduroys, but they're great. They've got a great heart.
1994 again?
Hey, it's evergreen, right?
I lived in freaking flannel in the 90s. I don't.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah,
I assume we're all Gen
X.
Shirt. Are we all Gen X here?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Yeah.
So my thing is I think that governments aren't good at everything, right? Governments are good at paving roads and emergency services and things of that nature. Yeah, that's true. And collecting taxes, they're great at collecting taxes. Yeah. I think when it comes to meeting the needs of people who have real needs, like people who don't know where the next meal is going to come from, people don't know where the next mortgage payment is going to come from. I think when you kind of reach that crisis level, I think the church is one of the unique local organizations that is equipped to meet that need well.
Yeah.
As long as that's the case, I'll be part of that.
I'm a huge supporter. Like my mother-in-law was Methodist. She's a former Catholic, left the Catholic Church, went became a Methodist. And our local Methodist church here does wonderful things in the community. And they're the type of church that you go, and they always have a food pantry. There's always somebody there. If you need it, they're going to give you the food you need without requiring you to listen to a sermon or a missionary or anything like that. They're great in the community. And so I think churches definitely have their place. There's a lot of atheist organizations that operate as a church because people need that community. They really do. But the fact that church attendance is falling so drastically. So I want to pose a question to both of you. Do you think that the exodus from churches is more about a decline of faith in God, just a decline of faith, or is it a decline in just the fact that church is becoming obsolete in a way?
I think on the one hand, there's a rise in scientific literacy, which is, I think, wonderful and great. And I'm choking out Scott here.
I was like, I'm not sure if he's actually choking or he's found something really funny.
You caught me with a sip of water. Yeah.
But then, like, I think, historically, you have, when you look at, not like recent, but not very far back, when you look at the modernist fundamentalist controversy in the church, where you had Christians just rejecting the scientific method and rejecting scientific inquiry because it was coming up with answers that conflicted with how they were already reading the Bible. And I don't think in the last 100 years that the church, at least in America, has gotten any real better about handling that. For me, it's like, I'm perfectly happy believing in, evolution, the Big Bang cosmology. As far as I'm concerned, well, hey, if that's what happened, God was sovereign over it. So I don't find it challenging. So I think for some people there's that challenge. And then I think more and more people are finding just, how church is lame. And, they're seeing just a lot of bad preaching. They're seeing, a lot of Christians who are not living up to their own professed ideals. And I think that's just turning people off. I know a lot of people that don't really believe in God, but they're kind of spiritual anyway, so I think there's not like a complete abandonment of faith, but I think it's just people don't know what they can put their faith in necessarily.
I always say that some of the most Christian people I know are Buddhists.
Right.
The most Christ-like people I know are Buddhists.
Exactly.
So I can get behind that.
Yeah, I think in thinking about your original question, like, why are people leaving the church? I think it's because people are finally starting to read their Bibles. And like you said, there are things that Jesus says, and then there are things that the pastor says. Like, well, Jesus never tells me I have to hate anybody. And my pastor's telling me that I have to not accept gay people the way they are. Well, there's conflict there. And I think there's finally a sense that, like, well, if there's conflict, I don't have time in my life for conflict, right? I've got a wife who deserves the best of me. I've got 2 kids who deserve the best of me. I've got a job I've got to work. I've got a community I want to serve. And so I don't have time for conflict with stupid people who preach the Bible wrong when I can read for myself that that the Bible says that to love God and to love one another. It's the simplest commandment in the world. Right. And so I think people are leaving the church because information now moves at the speed of light across the internet. And I don't have to deal with my yucky pastor across the street because I can actually listen to good teaching from anywhere at the speed of light.
Exactly. I think eventually, like I said, kicking and screaming, I think eventually the United States will shift more, hopefully, to a model of like Europe, Canada, where if you are religious, if you do, that's great, but don't build yourself off of it. Don't prostitute. You know what I'm saying? It'll be people of all faiths, and whether you're faithful or not will be accepted. I think we will eventually get there, but just like we kind of always do, we have to go kicking and screaming. So.
Yeah, there's an interesting, like, we're at a very interesting moment in American history where right now the pendulum is very much in a I'm an American. I'm a simple American. I'm a simple Bible-believing American. We're kind of in that mode. And at the moment, it kind of feels a little like, how in the world are we going to get out of that? Like, it doesn't seem like science and reason are going to move the needle. But I think you're right. I think at some point there is going to be a move back towards like faith is part of a life, and part of that diet is going to be science and common sense and education and evolution. Evolution is something even better than any of this provides today. Yeah.
I mean, this is a great debate among atheist circles, and I go to a lot of atheist conferences and talk to a lot of atheists, and there's always the debate that morality doesn't come from religion, that you know that murder's wrong innately as a human. That's kind of, it's cultural. And I'm always the one that kind of pushes back on that, and I say, okay, I understand there are probably people out there that have never been exposed to religion that are very moral people. So maybe some of it is more ingrained and more cultural. But my morals did come from being raised in a Judeo-Christian home. That's where I was first taught. You don't kill, you don't steal, you don't, covet, all this stuff. That's where my morality did come from. So I believe religion definitely has its place. I don't necessarily believe anymore for reasons, but I sometimes I wish I could go back. I really do. But when you have, been through the study and the stuff that I have, there's no way I could ever go back, and that's kind of sad. But sometimes I do miss that simplicity of just believing God is good, Satan is evil, and that's where everything comes from.
Right. So Mark and I are very different people when it comes to, I guess, our theology at the end of the day. I would say that between Mark and I'm probably the more progressive, in that, like, if you took all of the supernatural things out of the Bible, took all the supernatural things out of it, I would still follow Christ in some way, right? There's nothing supernatural about, like, the being good to one another, or not hurling stones at a woman, for wearing garments of different threads, right? There's nothing supernatural about any of that. And so I find it a little bit unnecessary to battle over. Jesus was born of a virgin. He lived a sinless life. He did miracles and wonders. He died on a cross and rose 3 days later to prove his power over death and ascended into the heavens. I don't find, there's nothing in that gives me a compelling reason to be spiritual, right? And so it's always an interesting conversation with Mark, because it's interesting that we have so much commonality, even with this chasm between us, that I find incredibly satisfying, that we can be living examples of how you can love through your differences and be the best of friends,
Yeah, I mean, why? Just because I know you're going to hell, but I'm going to go there right alongside you.
Yeah,
so,
you're coming with me.
We're together.
So.
Well, maybe we can all play poker.
There we go.
When we get there, that'll be fun. That'll be fun. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, I hear people talk about, like, what Scientologists believe, and I said, have you read what you believe? Talking snake, talking donkey, virgin birth. You're living in a glass house there, buddy.
Right. A genocidal God who wipes away all of humanity in a great flood.
Yeah. And somehow,
that's in the name of,
that's just
and
a
koala
Tuesday
bears
over
got
in
from
my house.
Australia to the Middle East.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, like I said, I went to Wheaton for my master's, and like this kind of stuff and how we talk about these things, because I have no problem, looking at something and saying, okay, well, is that a miracle, or was it not a miracle? Because there are things in the Old Testament, like in the conquest narrative, you have the long day, as it's oftentimes called, where people talk about, like, well, God stopped the sun in the sky, except that when you look at other ancient Near Eastern cultures, you see a commonality of the language being used there. And the sun standing in the sky is common astronomical or astrological language that describes what happens on the middle of the month.
It's just like,
so it's like, doesn't have to be at all miraculous, but it's saying that, hey, this is a thing that happened, and it was probably considered by their enemies a bad portent. It doesn't need to be a miracle, but it's still no less, significant for the story, because the story, the narrative that it's telling is saying that God is there for his people, that God was listening to his people. Of course, then there's the whole genocide thing. We'll just ignore that for now.
Yeah, but like, even if it was a miracle from their point of view, even if it was, it's 2022 and we have these things called telescopes. And these telescopes let us see into the universe and let us know that, you know what, the sun doesn't actually stay still for any amount of time. It's actually always still. And we're the ones that move around it. And you know what? Jesus is not floating up there somewhere, And so the idea that there's this portion of Americans that haven't moved on from a 100% literal take of the Bible, to me, is just one of the most baffling things of modern Christianity.
The fact that the whole flood story is mimicked in so many other Middle East, what we would call Middle Eastern mythologies, because we don't believe them, so therefore they're mythology. It is voice. It's literally a ripoff of Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh was a ripoff of an earlier flood story. I mean, it's there. It's just that whole fact that you can't understand that the Bible or the scrolls that make up the canon as we know it, it was all political, what ended up in there and what ended up not in there, first of all. But that all of this was written by a hodgepodge of authors that had cultural beliefs and cultural mores, and then it was kind of cobbled together by church hierarchy to make what we know as the Bible. So of course there's going to be discrepancies, but if you're truly a Christian, maybe you should just go on faith in the words of the founder of the religion, Jesus, and let that be it. And don't worry about the rest of it.
I think that's good advice generally, I guess like one of my favorite things that I learned is that, there's this whole swath of Proverbs that basically comes from an Egyptian text called the Wisdom of Amenemope, or Amenemope. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. I've only ever seen it in print. I've never heard it said. Because that was the thing. It's just saying, hey, it's the community of believers at some point in their generation saying that we're saying that this is wisdom. Like, this is good stuff. Just because it didn't come, we talk about, Buddhists, when you talk about the four pillars of Buddhism and the, was it the Eightfold Path I forget now.
I think it's the Eightfold Path, I think.
Yeah. Like, there's utility there for Christians. Like, what's true is true. And I think, for me, when I'm, reading, especially about the ministry of Jesus, I'm seeing what he's saying, blessed are the poor for the, blessed are the hungry, blessed are those who mourn, like, these are intense truths, and it's hard for me to deny the truth of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm all for the words of Jesus being used as a philosophy. It's just, the whole stuff, or the amalgamation of people that made up the word of Jesus. I mean, historical Jesus, I know there's a lot of on that. I don't want to get into a theological debate with anybody, but whoever spoke those words. Yeah. Whomever spoke those words, I think they're good words. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And they're good words if we actually pay attention to them, unlike, the Brian Houstons of the world and the Carl Lentzes of the world that use it as a weapon to
You and I are people. So on track. I was just about to say the exact same thing. Like, you have the Brian Houstons and the Joel Osteens who take these words and they don't even try to teach. They're just taking these words and using them for their own gain, whether it's financial gain or political gain or celebrity notoriety. They just use it as a weapon to beat people down and extract money out of their wallets.
Absolutely. And I think you can pervert anything. I mean, Jesus himself, chased the money lenders out of the church. I mean, come on,
Right.
So
and
as an atheist, I'm a pretty good apologist.
Yeah, I've perverted some things in my life. I'll tell you that.
But that's another show.
Yeah, that's a show with a certain kind of rating. I don't want to have a podcast get that.
Yeah. Well, guys, I have enjoyed this immensely. I'm going to link all of your stuff down below. Please go over and subscribe to them and support them on either their podcast or their YouTube channel. They're doing great work trying to reform, make people aware and help to reform church from within, which I think is great. And so any parting words before you go?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you so much for inviting us to come up here. It's been a real blast. I really had a good time. Thank you very, very much.
I had an awesome time.
Thank you so much for having us. I've listened to a couple of your episodes, and I highly, highly enjoyed them. I just listened to the one on, I watched the one that talked about the MLMs in the church.
Oh yeah, with the L mom, she's great.
Super fascinating stuff, and I love your opening theme music.
Oh, thank you. That was a friend of mine that wrote that for me, and he's great. He's a Broadway actor, so I told him just be theatrical with it. I love it. I get a lot of mixed reviews on that. Some people either love it or you hate it. I have some people that say I can't get it out of my head now, and I hate you for it. So
no, I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for having us. This was a total blast.
All right. Well, everybody, I'll be back real soon with another true crime or history or cult video. And until next time, keep on crime.